So my name is Chris, and I am honored to be hosting this discussion with Jeff Smith. As I'm sure most of you are aware, and if you are not, you're about to become aware. Jeff is the cartoonist behind do you still call it modern since it started 30 years ago? Modern classic.
Sure, yeah.
Bone, the perennial classic Bone, the noir science fiction Rasl, and the new sort of do you call it Paleolithic?
The Dawn of Man.
Fantasy adventure series Tuki. In addition to a number of other projects, Shazam, Little Mouse Gets Ready, which we read who knows how many times with my daughter, which was a real treat. I mean that sounds sarcastically. I loved it.
No.
Anyway, so we are really lucky to be having a discussion here today. So Jeff, thank you so much for coming to Charlotte and for talking to us today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
I'm
sorry that sounded sarcastic.
No. Just no. We're very earnest. No, anything that sounds sarcastic, we're just doing poor earnest delivery. So, something that I wanted to talk to you about before we go into some other things is Tuki. Right now, you are in the second iteration of it. So It is. Being published in book form, in landscape format, but before that, you did sort of a soft pass in issues. And right. Bone, before you did Bone, you for quite a stretch, and I'm not sure exactly how long, so I wanted to ask you that.
Yeah, okay. 3 years. In my college newspaper, I went to OSU. The college newspaper, student newspaper, was called The Lantern. It had a circulation of 50,000, and it was read by everybody, every day, 5 days a week. And I did a comic strip. It was basically proto-Bone, mm-hmm. but it was called Thorn. And I did it 5 days a week for 3 years.
So what I wanted to ask you is, in those instances, you basically had for lack of a better word, a public first draft of these stories. Like, how did that influence how you did subsequent Bone, influence probably isn't the right word. How did that impact how you did Bone once you transferred into comic books? And how did doing that initial pass of Tuki on the web influence how you're doing Tuki now?
Well, for one thing, when you make mistakes, you don't have to repeat them.
Yeah.
And also the things that connect with people, you find that out too. So, like, if you do something funny, then and people let you know, then hang on to that kind of thing. So with both of them, I was allowed to experiment and make mistakes, and basically switched over to almost another medium. Going from with Bone, I went from a comic strip, which is 4 panels, and to a comic book, which was infinite panels almost. You know what I mean? It's like you can have as many panels as you want. You can go on beyond the end of the comic book. I am actually going to collect the comic strips from college in like a Kickstarter in like this fall. So I happen to be just rereading all these old comics. And in some ways it's horrible, because looking back at your first stuff is horrible. But it was interesting to see that there are echoes of things that I was starting to do. There's a point where the valley gets destroyed in the comic book. That happens in the comic books later with Ghost Circles. I didn't remember that the character Thorn had kind of an existential crisis in the comic strip, which he certainly does in the later comic books. So it is kind of interesting to see these things. There's a storyline where Phonebone takes a little bear cub up into the mountains to find his family. That becomes he takes Bartleby the rat creature cub in the later books. So it was kind of fun to see all that. It's not very well done. It's kind of like if Bone is a novel, Thorn is a variety show. I mean, there'll be like the stories there. It's the same stories basically. The hooded ones, the rat creatures, are after the bones. But then I'll just stop and do a couple jokes, do a political satire or parody. It just moves around like that. There's a point where I, as the cartoonist, go into the strip and interact in the adventure. And the same way, when sometimes the Bones would just come out and sit on the edge of my board and talk to me whenever they were bored, which is kind of adorable. And then, so it was a strange thing, and I just experimented. I got to do things that got me in trouble. I did things that made people laugh, and it was a good experience. But by the time I got to Bone, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. Didn't want to do the comedy hour. I wanted to do a straight fantasy epic story that's real to the characters.
So I've only seen a few of the Thorn strips, but like when you get to Bone, you've established. It feels like you're very comfortable with the given aesthetic, because there isn't that much. I mean, there's artistic growth, but there isn't much of a stylistic change from the beginning of Bone to the end of Bone. Like you know your brushwork at the beginning. Is that something that's just how you drew, or did you decide on what you wanted the aesthetic to look like?
That was an actual decision. When I did the first, you take the last pages and the very first pages, you can see some differences, but not much, especially with the main character Phone Bone. I was like, I knew that this was going to be a story with a beginning and a middle and an end, and it was going to be big. I didn't know how big, but I wanted it to be like the Iliad or the Odyssey or the Lord of the Rings of comics. So I knew that at some point it would all be one big book, and that somebody somewhere would be able to read the whole thing in a weekend. So I was like, I made sure that Phone Bone did not change. I really tried hard to keep him. He did change a little bit, but Smiley Bone, his nose changes quite a bit. But I made an effort to keep it fairly consistent. An interesting thing, though, is that Thorn got much better. I got better at drawing her through the 12 years it took to tell the story. And that actually works for her arc, because her story as an ingenue is to grow up and to become a responsible adult. And as my drawings got better and she's becoming a grown-up, she looks more and more like a human. She's better drawn. And it kind of fits. But that was an accident.
Well, and were you using the same? You were working in a brush, and I asked this following question because when I first started cartooning, I wanted my inking to look like yours. That was my thing. If it didn't look like something that Jeff Smith might have done, I didn't want to do it that way.
It does not look like that now.
Well, it's transition, and eventually you learn your own shorthand, and you stop being your influence. But
stop and see him at his booth. Where's your booth number?
It's right at the front of the 1,000 block.
Yeah, it's amazing. He has a very crystal clear line and draws amazing historical and fantastic figures.
Thank you so much. Well, when I first started, it was all brush, and it was all pure blacks and whites. There was no attempt at value, but you were my gold star. Did you have somebody that you wanted your line to look like?
Oh yeah, Walt Kelly.
I figured Walt probably.
Kelly, he was a comic strip artist who did a very famous comic in the 50s and 60s and 70s called Pogo, and had some political overtones. But he was a Disney animation artist before that. And that style, that fluid, and just the quality of the drawings were really crazy. Thicks and thins. There was a real appeal. It was the same kind of appeal that you see in, Mickey Mouse or whatever, Dumbo. But so that's my style. My style is failing to draw like Walt Kelly.
Now you and you use a brush consistently through things. Did you use a brush on Rasl with all the the Jeeps and the things?
I did, and
a brush is hard on those angles.
Yes, they're really hard. But I just have a number one brush.
Yeah,
it's actually like a watercolor brush, and I use it. I can make really thick lines and twirl it out and get just one hair and just get all that in there. And I've been doing it long enough that I can make a pretty straight line for a Jeep.
But
boy, I tell you what, I'm not doing any more stories.
well,
Cars, man, cars and buildings. Those
honestly,
are hard.
well, I was wondering if that was an influence on your decision to do Tuki, because I mean, like bone is all organic shapes, and when there are buildings, they're organic buildings. It's
Yeah.
stone and rock and wood, and Tuki is all natural. It's out in the,
Yeah,
the
we went
wilderness.
back, yeah, I went back to just give me some trees.
Yeah, I mean, I
Go
can
back
see
to a
the
time
appeal.
when they didn't
yeah.
have T-squares.
Something that if anyone here hasn't read Tuki, can you tell us a little bit about what the story is?
Yeah, Tuki, it takes place 2 million years ago in Africa. It's and 2 million years ago, multiple hominids were still alive and existing at the same time. Even the famous Lucy that we've all heard about, her descendants would have still been around 2 million years ago. So was Homo habilis, so was Paranthropus boise, about a dozen human species were alive at that time. But the one that's most interesting 2 million years ago comes out of nowhere is Homo erectus, our direct ancestor. And he controlled fire and ate cooked food. So you've got this moment in time, this crux point, where there's multiple human species and then now there's one. That's a story, I thought.
Yeah.
There's a story there. So that is what Tuki's about. It turns out the other species do not think it's okay to have fire. That's dangerous, belongs to the gods. And they're kind of like, Tuki finds himself having to fight a lot. He's got a little family, he's trying to keep them alive.
Well, and it's amazing to me, like once it's there, it seemed like such a clear idea. And I think that's all the best ideas is the why hasn't this always existed? And I think this is an example of that, because it feels similar to a lot of high fantasy where you have different, these different species of people, like an elf and a dwarf or whatever,
lands,
and they're all intermingling,
Rivendell.
but they're different. And this is a way of doing that within the natural world that coincides. But one of my favorite things about that was your decision, and I may be wrong in that this might have transitioned between the comic version and now, or it might have just been early sketches. But your decision to name the groups after their scientific name,
Yeah.
And so when they're talking about the Australopithecus, they call it. That's the giant, I guess, but
that's a little.
That's the pithies, yeah.
Yeah, the
so
little
they
guys.
call them the pithies.
That's the Lucy
yeah,
species.
and they use those scientific names, which for me makes it so much easier to keep track of who they're talking
Well,
about.
that was one of the problems with when I originally did Tuki as a webcomic. And we colored it. I put a page, maybe 2 pages every other week. It was no big deal. But I made up names. I made up just fantasy names. I don't remember what they were. One of them I made up, I found out later, was like a name of an actual current existing African tribe. So then I tried to change that. And then it was like, where is this? What's happening? And it was actually my wife, V's, her idea. She says, well, if that's a Homo habilis, call them a Homo habilis. They're the habilines. And that's their scientific name. And it's like, well, why not? They're not speaking English, so whatever they're saying is,
Yeah.
That was
It's a
another
conceit anyway, but I just thought that was my that did make the reading the new one so much easier, and I felt like I understood it and had a sense of context.
That was one of the reasons of stopping the webcomic, because I think you were telling me. No, wait, was that you? Somebody was telling me some similar story, where I was doing this webcomic, and I was just la la la. I thought I knew where I was going, but there was a moment where I said, "Oh, I know what this story is." And it's not the story I thought I was doing. So I need to start from square one.
Yeah.
I was able to save a lot of the artwork. I had originally thought it was going to be the story of similar situation of the people, but his trick was he was going to be the first human to leave Africa. But I realized that's not the story. The story was he's the first one to have fire.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know that, and it was like while I was making the comic, I read a book called Catching Fire, which they know when we started to eat fire because our bodies, they look at the bones. They changed. Like gorillas and chimpanzees, they have these big giant guts. That's because it takes a lot of intestines to digest raw meat or nuts and berries or sticks or whatever. But once we started eating cooked meat, we could absorb much more easily the nutrients and the vitamins we want. And we didn't need all that. We started to flatten out and become more sleek and become us. And a lot of that, all that blood and energy that was going to digesting started going into our brains. So, sorry, I go into the weeds a little bit when I think about this stuff. Don't get me going on Moby Dick. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, that's fine. But yeah, I really like. Did to what degree does so Bone has sold millions of copies all over the world. One of the most widely read graphic novels that exists. Really helped to kickstart the current publishing boom for younger readers, which we'll talk about soon. But did the success of Bone and the knowing that those continued sales are there and the success is there gives you a little more freedom with your current projects to go back? And is that something that you would have done? Or I guess there's no way to know that. But
there is a way to know that.
Yeah.
I definitely, it's a little bit of that, but it's also a little bit the original decision to not give it to a publisher, but to just, my wife, V, and I formed a company together, Vijaya. And we created cartoon books just to publish my comics. And she runs the company, still does to this day. She's gotten it translated into like 35 languages. She licensed it to Scholastic, which was brilliant. And what that's done, well, for one thing, I tried to sell it as a newspaper strip. There's a newspaper syndicates, and I was trying to get it to be a daily strip. In fact, interesting side note, I was shopping my strip around the same time Bill Watterson was shipping around Calvin and Hobbes. He got a contract. I was not able to, which I actually am glad in hindsight, because I just didn't like their comments. Well, it's not that I didn't like them, I just didn't want to do them.
Yeah.
And so I just I'm not going to take this to a comic book editor. We're going to do it. Mm-hmm. Now, having gotten lucky enough to have success, that has let me just pick whatever projects I want. Mm-hmm. And I did Rasl because I was really into noir. And now I'm doing Tuki because I'm really into evolution. Mm-hmm. And all of them share certain commonalities. They're all genre stories. They usually have some element of the invisible. In Bone, the invisible is the dreaming. Mm-hmm. That's our dreams can connect us if you can get in touch with them. It's a fantasy. In Rasl, it's physics, it's particles, it's parallel universes. That's science is the invisible. Mm-hmm. And in Tuki, it's fire and what it represents, and there are gods. There are gods, but we don't really know if they're really real or if they're just because they're smoking too much.
Yeah. So you said you were really glad that they didn't take the strip because that led to this other stuff. As an artist who does a lot of conventions, I am really glad that you didn't do the strip too, because something that I think is really interesting, and I'd love to hear a little bit about from you, is that when if you go down to Artist Alley right now, you'll find a lot of people with their books on the table, books that they've worked on, books that they've published, whatever it might be. When you were starting, that was
You're not allowed.
outright forbidden.
Yeah, you were not allowed to do that. You would get in trouble.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that changed?
Yeah. I would be going to conventions, and it was mostly with San Diego, the Comic-Con out there, Comic-Con International. And there was Artist Alley, but you're supposed to just sit there. But back then, most of the people sitting there were people that drew the Green Lantern or Spider-Man or superheroes, and they don't own them. So they're just, you can come up and you can pay them and they'll draw you a picture of Superman or something like that. Or if you have a Superman comic book and bring it up, they can sign it. And that's basically what they did. And DC or whatever, the comic book companies would be cool about letting them do these drawings and selling them, because it helped them make a living. Well, I had my books and I was trying to sell them, and they said you can't do that. Vijay and I thought, well, you know what? We're publishers. Let's go out into the big middle of the section where all the publishers had. Marvel and DC had these booths, so we set up a booth out there, and they couldn't say anything. So that was good, and that was right when we started to collect the books into graphic novels, which were my little pogo books.
Yeah,
and they were pretty much a big hit right out of the gate. So there was it just kind of worked out that way that they didn't mind. They just stopped complaining about that.
Yeah, and
then they built. Here's what it was. Then they kind of started making it open. They did still try to segregate us.
Yeah.
So they said, okay, well, I guess Jeff's going to do this. So we're going to create Indie Island out there. They called it something different out there.
Like small press something.
It was the same idea though. But people started coming right away, like you.
And because there were a lot of you were part of a movement of self-publishing cartoonists that were coming out of the gate at that point, and I think that the change of convention rules to accommodate you and your colleagues, I think, was one aspect of it. But also, you didn't really see ongoing series being put into trades because that, in theory, stepped on the
retailer the back issues.
Yeah, the speculation market,
right.
I think, of back issues, and so
which was hot back then.
Yeah, and you got some flack from
I did
things for putting stuff into trade.
Yeah, I there used to be a magazine called Wizard, and it was really glossy, and it was kind of a good thing in some ways.
Yeah, well, Wizard's how I first heard about Bone.
Yeah, no, it was good. It treated comic books and cartoonists like they were basketball stars.
Yeah,
sports stars or something. So that was good. But there was a speculation element to them that wasn't quite so good. And I remember that in the back, I would still check. What's Bone #1 worth now? It's been out for 3 years or something. And it was like going up. It was like it was up to like $300 for that. And then I looked one day the next month, and it was $150. And I knew some people over there because I'd seen them at shows, and I called them up. I said, "What gives? Why did Bone #1 drop in value?" They said, "Well, because you just put it out in a collection with the first 6 issues for $12 or whatever it was." And I said, "Well, that's not Bone #1. Bone #1 is still Bone #1. I mean, that's a comic book, first printing."
Yeah.
That was another thing. I kept putting them back in print, but I would change like the color of the logo so that only the first printing had the famous red logo.
Yeah, but I think that made Bone accessible in a way that a lot of other continuing series weren't accessible. It made it, that's how I first found it. Is a kid brought it to school, that first cartoon books one, which I don't know if that was pre-Image or.
Oh, that was pre-Image.
Yeah, so that was pre-Image. So, and I, and she had got it in a city. She'd gone to a city. I was a rural area. She went, picked it up.
Did you have to put shoes on?
Yeah. Oh, I still am iffy about shoes. But she brought it back to school, and we were just going nuts over it. And so I could not get it. Like I didn't know how mail order worked. There was no shop nearby. So I took it to my dad's office and I photocopied the first chapter, and I reread that thing 100 times. And then as soon as I went to a city, I bought a copy because they had it at the bookstore there, and I was so excited.
I actually saw he tweeted up a picture of this one just recently.
Yeah.
His mom found this beat up old stack of like 20 pages from that he copied out of the first.
But
comic book.
it was the first way that it was the first way that I saw it, and then then it came out in Disney Adventures a little bit later, and I saw it that way, and but it was but that you putting it into that format made it to where it could be a perennial seller in a way that a lot of others, and I assume that was very deliberate.
That was intentional. When I started Bone, the first few chapters rely very heavily on humor and a little bit of a mystery to keep people coming back. But I was seeding the big story. The only person who knew was Vijaya. Mm-hmm. Nobody else knew that it was going to be this big story and that events in that first comic book would pay off at the very last one. So I had to kind of keep that a secret at first. And I remember I recently came across my business plan. That was another good thing about Vijaya. I was just like, I'm just going to go make a comic book. She's like, make a business plan and explain how you're going to get money from this. And this was good. She goes, and make sure it's good enough to show to a bank. And I did. I went to a bank and I showed them the plan, and then this is the lag between when we send the book to the printer to when we get paid for it, and the next when we have to pay for the number 2 to go to the printer, and we have figured all that out. So, and in the business plan it says, and so that newer readers will be able to follow the story and catch up easily, once a year we will collect the books in, and I put this in quotations, graphic novels. Because I did a banker
knew the term
would know
at the
that.
time.
No, huh?
Or you knew the term because that term hadn't really caught on yet.
No, I knew
just
the term
like
because
Eisner
I'm a comic book geek, and I know Will Eisner,
Yeah.
and and Frank Miller and those
Yeah.
guys. But but bank nobody else does. So.
Yeah.
But I laughed at it. I had graphic novel in there. So.
Yeah, Vijaya has been a huge part of this since the onset. In terms of like the business decisions, I guess has she been your sounding board with story decisions as well?
No, she loves cartoons. We met in college. I was doing I followed her to college actually. I probably wouldn't have gone, but she was going to OSU, and I knew they had that paper. So I wanted to go see if I get my comic strips in the paper. She loves comics. She likes my cartoons. We could have whole conversations where we do nothing but quote The Simpsons and Looney Tunes. And she really understands stories. Like, she sees the patterns. And it's amazing. Like in an episode of Law and Order, she knows exactly what's coming up. Or even in a movie, anything. And if there's something wrong with it, she can catch that too. So I do trust my own gut a lot, but if she spots something, she's been my editor and sounding board whenever I needed it. Absolutely. And she's been a brilliant business person about this.
Yeah.
She's handled this industry pretty well.
Well, and you've gone through a lot of shifts, but one of the things that has remained consistent, I guess, when it came to doing the Scholastic deal. So the Scholastic deal was a big deal.
Now we're talking.
Yeah.
Now we're talking.
The Scholastic thing was a huge impact because it did allow you to reach a whole big market. But until that time, there wasn't really a middle reader publishing. There wasn't that wasn't really a target demo for comics,
right.
that existed. And so when Scholastic first came out of the gate, did they already have a stable idea lined up? Were you how early in the development of Graphics' first public offering were you involved in?
Well, I didn't. They were planning it before I knew anything about it.
Yeah.
But they were planning it with Bone.
Yeah.
So they it turned out the way it originally started. I don't know where the initial idea came from. Scholastic was starting to catch on, and we'd been trying to get into libraries forever, Vijay and I, but librarians were now noticing that kids were checking Bone out. School librarians, public librarians, and so they contacted Scholastic and said, "You've got to publish this book." So they began working on a project, graphics, to do mainstream publishing for YA, and they wanted to launch with Bone. At the same time, Art Spiegelman of Mouse fame and his wife, Françoise Mouly, who's the art director of the New Yorker magazine, they wanted to start younger readers publishing imprint, and they contacted Scholastic, and they wanted to launch it with Bone. Okay, so the two groups started talking about Bone, and then they contacted us. So that's when we heard about it. I was talking with Art. I heard about it from Art, but it was but the president of Scholastic called Vijaya, and I think we were their only plan. If it didn't work, then that was going to be it. I think they were going to do Bone, and then they were going to hire some people to do Babysitters Club's adaptations as graphic novels, which is where Raina Telgemeier started. So, and once Raina came in, that was game over. We win.
Yeah. So y'all made the decision not to. I guess how was it difficult to convince them? Did it require any convincing to license color editions versus giving outright publishing rights? Because that's a very rare type of publishing contract, I think, for a house like that.
There was just no precedent for the kind of situation we were in.
Yeah.
We had the J&I that owned the books, then there's Scholastic, and they don't. We've been approached by a mainstream publisher before, but they didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
They want a lot of them would like, well, we'll put it with the pop-up books or the Dungeons and Dragons books or something, or they didn't know. So, but Scholastic says, well, we're just going to put it in the children's book section next to Harry Potter, and we're like, okay, I think that works. So then we had to decide, well, how are we going to do it? Because Vijaya and I had published them as the whole story. We were just wrapping up the very last story arc when they started talking to us. So we had 9 books is what it had been divided up into, which worked for me in a way because I like trilogies. So I had 3 trilogies, right? And each trilogy was 3 books, and I had some numerological happiness out of that.
Yeah.
So they like that. They're like, these books are good. What can we do to make them different? Because they were like, if you want to just make new covers, that's fine. We don't care if it's black and white. But Art Spiegelman was like, no, you need to do it in color. And I said, well, Art, Mouse is in color, and it's the greatest graphic novel that's ever been made. And I'm doing comic books partly because of you and your black and white books. Why should I do it in color? And he said, because Mouse is about the Holocaust. It's about war. It should be in black and white. But Bone is about life, and it won't be finished until it's in color. And I went, well, okay.
There you go.
All right, there you go. Straight from the mouse's mouth.
So Bone,
So we did it, but we did it.
Yeah.
We colored it ourselves. So
Yeah.
it was our decision. We oversaw it, and it just was going to be a different book.
Now, something I'm really curious. You mentioned on I think it was Twitter a little while back. You were talking about doing some sort of collected thing. Like how would you do like a big fancy edition of the Bone stuff?
Right.
Are you going to include the business plan in there and the back matter? Because I think a scan of that would be great.
Okay, I'll do that.
I think people would eat that
I
up.
will.
So you mentioned the
We are going to do that. We're going to do the first. We're going to like make big, like the absolute size.
Yeah.
We're going to do them in black and white, really big, and it'll have bonus material in the back.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it.
I was telling you this. I think I mentioned this at lunch. I was helping my mom clean out her attic, and we found amazing stuff. And we had some of it on this PowerPoint, but I can't get it to work. But it's like the first drawing of Phone Bone when I was 5 years old. The first drawing of Thorn when I was in the midst of being in the sway of Frank Frazetta and heavy metal. The first drawing of Thorn, and she's pretty sexy in like a Slave Leah outfit. All sorts of stuff like that. We're going to put that in. We're going to put that in some of the books.
So you mentioned Art talking about how Bone is full of life. So Bone has these big natural settings. Famously, Old Man's Cave being where a lot of it takes place. Old Man's Cave is a real place.
It's a real place.
It's near you. A lot of your stories pull very heavily from real places that you visited. Rasl takes from the American Southwest. The end of Bone from a trip to India that you took.
Yeah. Kathmandu, the kingdom that Grandma has run away from. She was the queen. It was based on Kathmandu. And I did that because it was closing. It was like around 2000 or something. And the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out. And there was those big, very King Arthur type, castles and stuff. And I'm like, I can't do that. That's exactly what the movies are doing. So I just had this idea. Because I'd been to visit India a few times, and I said, well, let's just go around India, and I'll get some ideas. I'll just see what I see, because the place is supposed to be old and full. It's very mystical because of the dreaming and all that, and that's exactly what I found. Yeah. Kathmandu especially, because there's a heavy Buddhist element to it. There's a Hinduism, and I got a lot of that. Really got sucked into the story. It was really wonderful.
And Tuki is really inspired by a trip you took to Africa.
Yes. I went to Africa with Larry Martyr, who was the cartoonist of Bean World. I don't know if anybody remembers that. He was also the president of Image Comics in the 90s when they were on their big swing upward. Anyway, he and I went to Africa because his wife worked with Abercrombie and Kent. Which one's Fitch is the clothing store.
Yeah. Oh, it's not.
Kent, Abercrombie and Kent is the real place, the real name. And they run tours, photography. You go visit the animals in the parks. And she worked with them and could get us a great discount. So the two couples, we drove around and visited the animals. But at one point, in between the Serengeti and Ngorongoro crater, there's the Great Rift Valley, and there's a place called... gosh, I'm blanking on it all of a sudden. It's where the Leakeys... Olduvai Gorge, thank you. Olduvai Gorge, which is where the Leakeys found, 3 million-year-old Paranthropus boise skulls. They didn't find Lucy, but things like that. And we went there, and I went down and I was standing, they have like a little plaque there. And I was like, right on this spot, our entire... Because I kept finding more and more, deeper down they would go, different species, different versions of us, all the way back down to Lucy. And I'm like, right here, our whole story, all the people that ever ran and run and ate and fought and loved was right here. And I thought, and I had this, then I had I had a vision. I was looking up, and there's like the wall of this area where we were in, and above it was palm trees, and I could see kind of like the trees going, but I imagined all the different species, the Australopithecines, the Homo habilis, the Homo erectus, all of them, almost walking around together, interacting almost as if they were like at a farmer's market, or maybe a stone cutting market or something. And I never forgot that vision until I read this book called Catching Fire, I mentioned. And it talked about how they've discovered that it was a 2 million year point when fire made this big change it was the biggest leap. And I thought, I said, wait a minute, that matches the vision I had. They were all there. And I thought, okay, I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah. So you're in the midst of Tuki right now. And I'm not committing you to anything.
Okay.
But have you taken any other trips where there are locales that you're like, this sparks something in me? Like, I want to see something here. That's
interesting you say that, because when I was in Africa, I had no idea that I would want to do a comic book about it. But strangely enough, I started taking lots of pictures of rocks and trees and animals and everything, jungles, savannas, because just in case.
Yeah.
However, I do not. I think Tuki might be a wrap up.
Okay.
Yeah. Start time. I have 2 books of Tuki out now, and I'm planning on doing 6 total. So
yeah.
I've got like 4 more, and I'm working on those.
And one last thing, and then we'll open it up for questions. In Tuki and somewhat unexpectedly, when you are introduced to the Australopithecus character, it adds an element of humor to the book that I think sort of balances the tone between the danger that's there and the enjoyment from watching this scruffy little
band of
losers. Was that something that you were always thinking about? Did working on Rasl, where there wasn't like a humor component, make you miss getting to scratch your funny itches?
That's exactly correct. Yeah, Rasl was. Rasl came about because I was late at night, at 2 a.m, inking finishing a bone, and I would have my laptop open and I was watching, because by the time you're inking, you've thumbnailed it, you've drawn it tight, and you've drawn it so many times you can ink and still kind of like pay attention to like a director's commentary or something. So that was I just had a real noir moment where I was really into Maltese Falcon and Blade Runner and all sorts of fun stuff. So I don't remember what you asked me.
If Rasl not having the chance to do jokes, because you've got a great sense of comic timing, and I imagine that's probably hard to not
I don't
work that, because tonally it doesn't. resists it.
I do regret that there wasn't any humor in it. I think it would have been. I think I would have sold more if it had just some humor in it.
But anyway, I really like that when you find it in Tuki.
Humor like
I feel
like a
good
Marvel movie, like a good Marvel movie.
Yeah.
They've got just the right amount of humor to like. Oh, that's kind of good. Keep you going.
Well, I'd like to open it up to questions now, if that's all right. Does anybody have a question for Jeff? Yeah, Aaron.
So, could you talk about what sort of changes or accommodations did Scholastic make when they republished Bone, and in particular, how did they choose the particular format they published it in?
The size was, that's just what books are. I tried to get them to make them a little bigger, at least as big as ours, but that was just what fits on the shelf. Those same kind of restrictions apply in the comic book world too, where doing Tuki landscape is probably going to not be the greatest thing because it won't fit on a shelf. But it looks cool, so I don't care. Then as far as like doing it in color, again, that was, we got talked into it by Art Spiegelman, Art Spiegelman, I kept my deal with Scholastic, and apparently Art and Francois couldn't quite come to an agreement, so they went off and did Toon books separately. So I didn't actually end up working with Art, but he did affect it with the color. Other than that, was there any other kind of format question you had? Oh yeah, no. What was there any changes? I'll tell you a quick story. So it took 6 months or so to negotiate the contract. So when we get it all figured out, they said, we're going to fly you out from Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, to New York, and we're going to have a big day. We're going to have a signing ceremony. It's going to be so much fun. So we fly out, and we have dinner with them the night before, and we love these people. I would totally grok this group of people. And so the next morning, we're very excited. We're supposed to go in around, I think, 11, and we were going to start this day. And we get a phone call early, and it was the president's. I'm blanking on her name, but anyway, it was her secretary who called and said, "Oh, can you come in half hour early? She wants to talk to you." And we hang up and we go, "Uh-oh, I know exactly." We looked at each other. We went, "They're not going to want to," because there's the dragon has a cigarette and the Smiley Bone has a cigar. They drink beer. So I know exactly what this meeting's about. We agreed. V and I agreed. We're going to, if they want any changes, we're going to be very polite and just say thank you, but no thank you, and we'll just go home. And we were solid on that. So we went into our office, and in Scholastic they have these kind of funny. They're like the same kind of chairs you had in like kindergarten. They're a little bit bigger. So we're sitting at this table in these little wooden chairs, look exactly like they did when you were a kid. And pleasantries, she reaches down, she picks up the stack of the 9 books that Vijay and I published, put it on the table, and there's hundreds of Post-it notes with words on it like beer, tobacco, G's, Jeez, my characters say, gambling. And she starts to say something, I go, I can't believe her name's not coming to me. I said, we thank you very much. But we never said we were a children's book. Children and parents and teachers and librarians said it was a children's book all over the world. It was already in like 15 languages by that point. I was just drawing it for other cartoon heads, like this knucklehead over here. It was teachers and parents that said it was a children's book. So I said, we're just thank you, but we're going to pass. And she said, can't we just like the beer? Like, can't we like call it butterbeer like they do in Harry Potter? And I was like, no. Definitely not. No, I did. No, I was like, no. It's done. We're not. I'm not changing it. It's done. And to her credit, she one beat, picked the thing off. I set it down, and it was the book fairs that had raised the objection at the last minute, and she said book fairs is just going to have to catch up. And we signed it, and book fairs caught up. Yeah. And now I own a house in Key West.
Okay, next question. Yeah.
So I was introduced, and you brought this up, I was introduced to Bone and many comics through the Disney Adventures magazine that I got, that I think we were picking them up at $1.99, and then I got a subscription to it. And that was my introduction to comics, and that's where I found Bone. Can you speak to the licensing of that, the coloring for that, versus the other deals, and just working with that magazine?
Yeah, it actually was kind of fun. It was at a meeting. It was called ProCon. It was before, I think, one of the WonderCon. It was right before WonderCon. There was like a couple days where pros got together and talked about issues that were going on in the industry. And at that meeting, Marv Wolfman and Heidi McDonald, two very well-regarded comics people, were working at Disney Adventures Digest on the comic section. And they came up to me and they said, we'd like to reprint Bone in the comic section, like in little bits. So we worked it out so that I would do like 8-page sections, and I would kind of draw or construct a new opening page and maybe like an ending, like a place for it to end. And we did, I can't remember how many issues. We did a few issues. But then they hired somebody to color it, who was a brilliant colorer, Tom Luth, who does...
He does Usagi now.
He does Usagi. He's always done Usagi, and he's fantastic. But he does flat colors, which I love.
Yeah.
Well, they wanted, because the Image was out and they were doing all the shiny...
The gradients.
They got Tom to do like kind of a 3D thing, which I don't think Tom liked it, to be honest. But that was the first time it was in color, and it was a huge success because there's maybe 200,000 people that buy comics on a regular basis that are real dyed-in-the-wool comic book store junkies. Well, all of a sudden, I'm in a magazine that's being read by 6 million kids, and overnight I was the most read comic in America.
And I think that translated to sales with the floppies that you were putting out after that. I think because I think that once those kids grew to be old enough to go to the comic shop, I know a lot who sort of had that experience. Like Disney was their first.
Many people still to this day are today. When I do a signing after this, I know there's going to be more than one person who's going to say, "I first saw this in Disney Adventures Digest." That was definitely a good thing.
Yeah. Next question. Yes.
Obviously, everybody here probably loves Bone. I would love to know what critiques the newspaper that passed on you gave.
The critiques from where?
The syndicates.
When you were trying to get
Well, the big problem right out the gate, the gorilla in the room was my hero is Walt Kelly, who did Pogo. He owned Pogo. At the end of every strip, there was a Circle C 1961 Walt Kelly. If my hero owned his strip, I'm going to own my strip. Okay. Well, I pretended we were going to work that out. So I was never going to get us. That was a big problem. You can't. That was what Waterston's big fight with his was. He wanted the ownership back, which I think he got, and then he quit. They didn't want They didn't want Thorn. They didn't want the dragons. They didn't want the fantasy element. They wanted it to be the Bones in Boneville. And it was around that time when I began to switch the name of the feature from Thorn to Bone, except that I wasn't going to give up the story. Oh, they didn't want the story either, because I had this idea. Because they were like, that's continuity strips. Continuity strips don't sell anymore. The family strips do, or the cartoony Bones. So it was things like that. I remember the straw that broke the camel's back. It was a meeting I had, and I think it was with the editor Bill Yates at Kingfisher Syndicate, but I can't remember for sure. So I won't totally blame him. So I'd done it like a series of multiple sample sets and sent them in. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Sent it in, and they always had something to say to send me back. And I was like, this better be good this time. And he says, well, why don't you have the Bones talking thought balloons? Like, because they're not telepathic? Why do you want them to talk in thought balloons? Because that's how Garfield talks. I said, goodbye. That was it. I walked into a comic book store right around that time and saw The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller Watchmen, the first Big Fat Cerebus book, discovered the Comics Journal, the Hernandez brothers, and that was it for me. I was like, syndicates.
Yep.
I'm gonna go do comics. So I had to go tell Vijay I want to sell my animation company and do underground comics.
You know, so your animation company, I'm sure I wasn't the most rabid Jeff Smith enthusiast, but I was enthusiastic enough to get a copy of Roger Dangerfield because I knew that you had done
Rover
Dangerfield. Because I'd read that you had done work on it, so I was
did.
trying to spot the Jeff Smith art on Rover.
You wouldn't be able to. They have the model sheets and stuff, and it's Rover Danger. Take my wife, please. Oh, that's Henny Youngman. Sorry.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you went to OSU in Ohio.
Yes.
Other
Go Bucks.
Other creators of comics from Ohio, Ryan K. Vaughn, Backder,
Watterson,
Siegel and Schuster. What is going on in Ohio?
Yeah, and it's not just it's like Milton Caniff.
Oh yeah, no, I mean the list is actually
the list is it's ridiculous.
Astonishing. And it's not just cartoonists; it's great cartoonists and foundational cartoonists.
I think Opper, yeah, Frederick Opper was there. I mean,
Happy
all of
Hooligan.
them. Jiminy Christmas, yeah, it was ridiculous.
Windsor McCain worked at the Cincinnati Enquirer right before he came up with Little Nemo. Yeah, Superman was invented in Cleveland. Yeah, it's an incredible list. My friend Larry Marder that I mentioned earlier, he has a theory about that. He thinks it's our position pretty much at the frontier line. The frontier line in the 1800s was pretty much, you got into Pennsylvania, and Ohio was the frontier, probably more in the mid-1800s. But there's still Chicago and the Great Lakes. So, and underneath Ohio is Cincinnati and the Ohio River. So his theory was that was his information touch point, and that newspapers were a big deal in Ohio, and there was just a lot of cartoon blood in there. You buy that?
Yeah.
I taught a comics history class back when I taught, and it's Ohio. Everybody, that first half of the 20th century, it's almost all Ohio. It's wild.
It's amazing.
And now Ohio is the center point for sort of the biggest sort of academic style comic
CXC
celebration, of which you are a co-founder.
I founded it with my wife and the originator of the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, Lucy Caswell. And I've known her since I was in college, and to this day she's a very good friend and advisor. And when she was getting ready to retire, she had this show that she put on every 3 years. Are you trying to talk to us, or?
5 minutes, but sorry. Guys.
Oh,
okay.
5 minutes.
Okay, that's all right. I knew that's what he was going to say, but usually they hold up a sign or something. She said she was getting ready to retire, and she said, "We're going to retire the show unless you have an idea." Well, her show was very academic, very friendly, very, very casual, very, very collegial. And I said, yes, I would do your same show, but we'll open it up to the public and involve comic books and graphic novels, because she was basically all about newspapers and political cartoons and stuff like that. And it was limited to the audience was 300. So it was a very, very academic affair. And, Vijay and I travel the world, and we go to these great shows everywhere.
Angoulême.
That's Vijay right now. Excuse me. I don't know if you can hear that. I'll try to put that on. I'll be right back. But we went to our favorite show is in Italy. It's in Lucca. And in the center of town, it's a medieval walled city, one of the original homes of banking. So it's still there. And of course, the wider city beyond that is like a regular city. But the city center is this walled city, and it's got circular streets. And you go in there, And you could shoot a movie about Michelangelo in there right now, and all you'd have to do is get rid of a few telephone wires. I mean, it is medieval, and it's awesome. In the very center of the city, they set up tents, and that's where like the comic book show really is. But mostly, it's around the whole rest of the city. You walk around this beautiful place, and what was maybe a stall, 100 years ago, has been all cleaned up, and it's a gallery now. And you can go in there and see original Karl Barks art. Like, wow, this is great. And then later on, you see some other show. Or you'll go to another part of the city and have lunch. They specialize in white bean farro. So good. And I thought, that's my other idea for our show. We'll not only make it open to the public and include comics and graphic novels, but we'll make the city, Columbus, a character in this thing. And we do. We hold it in the libraries. We worked with all the museums, the other art schools. So it's held in like 4 or 5 different places over the course of a 4-day weekend.
Well, and if y'all haven't had a chance to go out there and you're able to get to Columbus, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's just panel after panel after panel of some of the most amazing cartoonists. A lot of workshops, and it seems to be sort of an even split. The attendance seems to be about, at least for the panels, about 40% cartoonists, 40% academics who specialize in comics, and then 20% comic enthusiasts, like just regular Joes. But it is a great makeup, and it's a great thing.
Yeah, it's got a really good vibe, which I give all credit to Lucy for that. That's her feeling.
And I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Yes.
Has Rasl been optioned, and could you expand the story?
I left it. It has been optioned. It's been optioned twice, but these deals fall apart. But I did leave the story open. If you're familiar with the story, there's a final climax in the desert, and he just throws off his suit. That suit's still out in the desert somewhere. Somebody could find that. I left that open, but I don't know if I'm going to get back to that or not.
I have one more question.
Hit me.
Because
Hit me.
we still have 2 minutes. So you said that there is a new Tall Tales book. Coming out.
Yes, thank you.
That's
what I'm supposed to be talking about.
Well, I was going to say, are you writing it? Did Tom Snigowski work on it again? Is it how is it being done?
Okay, this is more Tall Tales, which is a sequel to a book a few years ago called Tall Tales. And the idea of Tall Tales was, Scholastic wanted more bone, but I didn't really want to do more bone. But I did have a couple of orphan stories. One that I had done an original story for Disney Adventures Digest, and we had Tom Snigowski and I. He's a writer. He's a very funny writer, but he writes like Vampirilla books and Buffy books. But he's so funny. I could barely take it when I go to lunch with him. So I said, you need to write a comedy book. So we wrote like a graphic novel about the founder of Boneville, Big Johnson Bone. He founded the trading post on the Rolling Bone River. So he made up these Tall Tales. So I had that whole story. So then we said, okay, we'll do a couple new original things. We've got the basic part of the books are reprints that nobody's seen in years, and I'll do a wraparound story where they're telling these stories around a campfire. So the Smiley Bone will take the Bone Scouts out and they'll tell stories, and it was a fun book. We had a great time. So Tom said, I want to do another one. I said, well, I have like one orphan story left. Yeah, and he goes, well, I've got 3 of them. So this time we actually got some other artists like Stan Sakai did a story about the pig, about the little riblet who's like way too much for the 2 stupid rat creatures to handle. We have another one that talks about how the rat creatures got their obsession with quiche. Big Johnson Bone goes to the moon. It's a really fun book, and I did a story 5 years ago. That was maybe more than that. Well, I don't know. About the bones on the journey back from the valley. It takes place after the events of Bone, but they don't quite get back to Boneville. And so we colored that, and then I did a new wraparound story. The whole package just came together really quickly, and I was surprised. And then I was surprised how much I liked it.
Well, that's great. Well, I look forward to reading that. So,
September. That's going to come out in
yeah.
September.
Thank you so very much, Jeff, for taking the time to do this. Thank you, everybody, for coming out and being such a good audience. And you are doing some signings is it at the Heroes booth?
Right now, it's right next. It's the Heroes information booth, right next to when you first walk in the door. It's right there, and we're going to do that right now.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, everybody, thank you.
Thank
so
you
much.
very much for coming.